My name is Tim Besley. I'm a member of the Economics Department at LSE and also President-elect of the Royal Economic Society, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar on navigating the job market. There's been a lot of interest, people are still joining us, and I'll tell you a little bit about the panel and how we plan to run the event. For many of you who I assume are on the call, you may be going on the job market or contemplating going on the job market this year, and we hope through this session that this will help to inform your strategy to some extent. Of course, this year's job market is not like any previous job market where there's going to be almost certainly very extensive use of the medium we're using today, namely Zoom or other video conferencing facilities. So we're going to talk to you about the preparation. It's fair to say that not too many people know just how it's going to play out. Everybody on this call has not yet experienced a job market done virtually, but it's legitimate to start asking questions about how that will work and how it might differ from before. But you'll obviously have to bear with us that some of the answers to those questions will be based on conjecture rather than evidence. We have an excellent panel for you today, but before I introduce them, I should thank Kevin Lee, whose initiative led to this webinar and is playing a key role in the European job market for economists this year, which he would have been organizing in person had it not been for current circumstances. Yet still, we are very grateful for the effort that he has put in to bring this event about. And I should also thank Julia Randall-Edwards from the Royal Economic Society for her input. So I'm going to turn to the panel now and just tell you what each of them is going to cover, and then what we'll do. We haven't had a rehearsal, that wasn't possible, so I'm going to ask each panelist just to switch on their video and mic at the time that I specify, and each of them is going to stick to time, I hope, if otherwise I'll have to intervene. We're going to begin by discussing with Michael McMahon and Marina De La Gusta from Oxford and Reading, respectively, what hiring institutions are looking for. We'll then move on to Martin de Ridder, who's fresh from the experience of being on the job market, is now at the LSE, and he's going to talk about that experience. Then we're going to talk about how first interviews work with Marina, then the fly out and academic visits with Michael, and then finally the joyful experience of choosing between offers with Caitlin Brown from Manchester. So that's the plan. They will each take no more than 5 minutes, and then we'll have a significant amount of time, I hope, for Q&A at the end of it. So I'm not going to take up any more time by way of introduction. I'm going to turn over, first of all, to Michael McMahon, who's going to talk about what hiring institutions are looking for.
Thank you very much, Tim. Yeah, so I'm just going to make two sort of key points. The first one, which I think is sometimes lost, is that departments are not hiring a paper, they're hiring a colleague. Obviously, at this time of year, there's a lot of focus on the job market paper, the JMP, and this is clearly a very important part of the application for research-focused institutions. But when sitting on the other side of the table, the key is that the department or the hiring group is trying to envisage you as a future successful member of the department, of the group. And often, institutions, when they're hiring, have many different attributes which would contribute to success. Many of these are written down, albeit in somewhat uncommitted, unweighted sense in job descriptions. So, for example, teaching, research, admin. But you may be applying to policy jobs, in which case certain aspects of policy work will be emphasized. And different places and even different roles within individual places have different weights on each of these. And so, you know, it's important to recognize that that every job that you apply for will have different aspects, and some of them you'll possibly prefer more or less. But the more you're likely to enjoy all of them, the better it will be for you to enjoy the job if you get it. But also, the more easily you'll be seen as being someone that could be hired. The second point I wanted to make is specifically on the research. And I want to sort of emphasize that when people come to present their research or talking about it in interviews, and we'll come on to those in a moment, what you're trying to show, as you are when you write the paper, is what you're adding to the body of knowledge in your chosen field, on your chosen topic. Essentially, this goes down to the old question, what is your contribution? But equally, on the job market, we're also trying to get a sense of what your future contributions might be in that field or in other field. It's really on the research side, certainly for research-focused institutions, it's the time that you in the interview, first of all, hopefully with the letter, the job market application, and the job market paper, the interview, and then the flyout. In each case, you're trying to convince people, both in your own field but also other fields, that you are making a contribution, you can see what the contribution is, and you have a sort of path towards future contributions. And the one thing which I'm going to come back to, but I want to just mention one moment here, is don't neglect the fact that you're also trying to convince people in other fields. When I talk about the actual job visits, what used to be called flyouts now should be called zoom outs, it's going to be other people that will often play an even bigger role in where you rank at the end. But I shall leave it there in an effort to not be held to account by Tim and his iron fist with time.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Michael. And there'll be plenty of opportunity to question Michael during the Q&A. I'm now going to hand over to Marina for her take on the same issue. Marina, thank you.
Thank you, Tim, and thanks everyone. And well, on the same issue, really, echoing what Michael just said, this collegiality item is really super important. So the perspective you're hearing from me is from a non-top institution, perhaps, but the ones that, of course, do the most of the hiring throughout the year. So these are really institutions in which a lot is expected of you in terms of showing this collegiality. And the reason is that very often departments are not as large, and there are significant negative externalities from managing colleagues that may not be flexible and nice and people who are willing to adapt to circumstances. At the same time, of course, the advantages are there as well. So these are institutions where we expect people to show independence and initiative, and not to expect a very large support network in and of itself, or perhaps a large pool of mentors, because the nature of the thing is such that there's not enough seniors perhaps to support the careers of juniors to start with. That's also, that's a curse and a blessing in everything. That's also an opportunity, because it gives you the chance to develop perhaps your own research agenda much more than you would otherwise elsewhere. But again, flexibility, collegiality are really key. One of the things that has happened in my many years of recruiting, so I've been at Reading for about 20 years, and since at the time I was one of 2 women, I was always on recruitment panels, even before I became a senior and before I became a head of department. But one of the things that are very clear is that, other institutions are also looking increasingly, and that includes top departments, for the ability to communicate outside your field. So we are actually not just wanting to communicate outside field because on the panel there will be people who are non-economists, but because actually grant awarding bodies are looking for interdisciplinary research to fund, and also because lots of opportunities are there to work with people who are non-economists these days. So this is another thing that I would emphasize thinking about, and this is the kind of thing certainly that institutions are looking for more these days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina. And let me just reiterate what you'll have seen in the chat, that as questions occur to you, and they can be very nitty-gritty questions or big picture questions, please put them in the chat. And after our presenters, there will be plenty of opportunity for me to put those questions then to various presenters. Our next presenter is Martin, who's going to recount his experience of what it's like to be on the job market and offer you some wisdom from that. Martin, over to you.
I can't start my video I think now I can. Yeah, thanks a lot, Tim, and thanks a lot to the RES for organizing this. So I'm going to recount my job market experience. I'm going to do it in 3 steps. So I'll first summarize what I thought of the job market in general, and then I'll give some advice on preparation, and I'll finalize saying a few things about the European job market in particular, because I think that's one of the topics of this webinar. So this morning, when I tried to summarize what it's like to be on the job market, I came with this cliche 3-word summary, which is the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I thought the good part, the best part, which is what makes the job market great, beyond the fact that you'll have a job at the end of it, but the good part is that it's your introduction to the profession. The job market is an opportunity for you to share your work with a lot of people, because as you apply to jobs, you're sending your paper to a lot of places. It's a chance to get exposure, because you meet a lot of people, either through interviews or through the Zoom outs, as Michael just called them, which builds your network, which is very important later on to build co-authorship relationships. You'll probably meet potential referees as well. I'm actually working on 2 co-authored papers right now, which is from people that I've met on the interviews for the job market. And throughout the process of the job market, you also get tremendous feedback on your paper. So I think the quality of my own work definitely jumps from the many conversations that I had while on the market. So that's the good part of the market. So then the bad part, and that's that being on the econ job market is a very fatiguing experience. The main reason for that is that it's a very condensed process. It basically starts in November, it's over by February, and everything happens in between. It's fatiguing because it's stressful, right? You don't know what your life is going to look like, but it's also just plain busy. Right? You have to prepare your pitch for the interviews, then you have to prepare your presentation for the flyouts. So I thought that was personally the most negative bit. And then the ugly part of the job market, that's the randomness. So even though you might have the perfect paper and you do everything right, there's a lot of randomness in where you actually end up getting a job. And that's because, and I can now see that from the university part, there's a lot of constraints as a candidate you're not aware of. So even departments that might have an open search in the sense that they're not looking for a particular field might actually have a preference for certain fields. So throughout the process, you might get rejection from places that you thought that you did really well at. And that's not necessarily because of something that you did wrong, right? This is just a part of the low matching rate in academic jobs. So that's the ugly part. Overall, though, I found it a very enjoyable experience, and that's for the first part. The good bit is the fact that you meet phenomenal people. They make time for you. They read your research, and I've never experienced that to the same extent during the PhD. So I hope those on the market will enjoy it. Then, in terms of the second point, how to prepare for the job market. I would say the main thing that you should be doing now is to talk to as many people as you can. This could be your fellow PhDs, it could be faculty members, it could be people that visit your department, either physically, although that won't be happening too much now, but also virtually, right? So any seminar speaker you should be speaking to, pitching your job market paper to, because you want to have basically any response that you can get to a paper. So you want to get as many views as possible, because once you get to the stage where you're interviewing or you're on flyouts, you want to have basically had any question that ends up coming in there. You want to have had that before to get some time to think about it and to give a better response. So talk to as many people as possible. That's advice one. Second advice, be healthy, right? Exercise a lot, eat healthy, because that really helps with the fatigue. And the third piece of advice is to talk a lot with your advisors and letter writers, because they are very important on the market, because they can help institutions figure out how you're doing on the market, whether they have a shot at hiring you. So that's really important to maintain that relationship. I'm almost out of time, so just quickly on the European job market, I want to say two things. First, when it comes to the European job market, be very clear to signal that you're interested in European jobs, and that especially applies to US candidates that might want to get a European job, because I know from friends that were in the US before is that some institutions thought that they might not want to come. So if you're serious about Europe, talk to your advisor and make sure that you find a way to credibly signal that you might want a European job. Final piece of advice on the European job market. Note that it's a bit different from the American job market. In particular, institutions might have different timings, they might have different deadlines. So for the US, usually your deadline for applications is Thanksgiving weekend, but for some European universities, it's earlier. And it might also be quite cumbersome to apply. So you might have to go through a lot of forms on the webpage to apply for jobs. So that can take the better part of a week. So make sure that you allow plenty of time for applications. That was what I had, Tim.
Thank you very much, Martin. So we go back now to Marina, who's going to talk about first interviews and how they work. Marina.
Here I am. Well, first interviews are an interesting thing because, of course, you haven't had much chance to practice elsewhere. One of the things I always say is, of course, remember to do your homework, because even if there are interviews you're doing for places you're not terribly interested in, it still is important to the panel that's interviewing you that you show that you know where the place is, who the people interviewing you are. And I'm sorry if this sounds perfectly obvious, but we've had all sorts of experiences. And it is really important that you also show that you're actually committed to getting that job, even if that is perhaps not the case, even if it's not necessarily your first preference. As Martin said, the matching rate is really quite low, and so many other things come into the decision, which actually have nothing to do with your performance. So you really want to control all the things that do have something to do with your performance. And so things like the way you come across, the fact that you look like you really want to go to the place that is now interviewing you are super important. And I cannot stress how much work you should be putting into this. It is, again, interesting as a perspective of a non-top institution to actually be used very often for training for the important interviews. So that's something you really, even if it is true, you really don't want to be revealing that outright. And in any case, doing some training in finding out who people are is useful anyway, and it's valuable because people are members of very wide networks. And it doesn't matter which institution they happen to be working at. Very often they could be people, as Martin said, that turn into useful mentors. We have people we didn't really appoint, either because they chose not to come or because we couldn't offer them the job, that are still in touch with me many years afterwards. And of course, it's a small circuit. So remember, you'll meet everyone. It's always important to look after this aspect of the interviewing as much as having your presentation polished. One little danger of having the presentation super polished is, you kind of rush through it and you don't really leave people time to digest it and to ask you some questions. So again, remember that this is an exercise in getting some feedback on your research as well. As Martin said, it's an opportunity sometimes to get the little bit of extra supervision that you didn't quite get on that particular topic. So it's actually a chance to improve the paper. The more you feel whilst you're talking about your job market paper that it's actually a seminar rather than a job interview, the better. And the more you switch into, this is now a job interview and I need to impress them and look like I'm listening and that I know who they are in the second part, even better. So thank you very much. I'll stop here again.
Thank you again, Marina. We'll now turn back to Michael, who's going to talk about the fly out or zoom out, as he's now christened it, and the academic visit, how it works from both sides. Michael.
Okay, great. Yeah. I will just, a typical academic visit, of course, they vary from place to place, but will involve a research presentation, usually 45 minutes, maybe an hour, maybe a full hour and a half, depending on the place. It will involve a lot of meetings. So these would be one-on-one, typically with faculty members in their office. And often there's also a meal. Now, as we move to Zoom, clearly the meal can't happen, but we've all become very adaptable at having both meetings and presentations online. So to address Martin's health concerns, if you're doing a lot of meals, they often contributed to weight gain, at least they contributed to my own weight gain during the job market. So that you'll have your own chance to eat your own food instead of being taken to restaurants all the time. In terms of the meetings, I think most people understand the presentation part, but in terms of the meetings, these take place in an individual's office typically, and they're usually very similar to the first interview at something like the European job market. So a combination of questions that get at, tell me about your job market paper, Tell me about your pipeline, other research, what will you work on in the future? You know, talk about teaching, what you do, what you can do, what you'd like to do. And also, you know, a chance for you to ask questions to them. So if you think they're the four main sort of elements of the first interview, the meetings that you will have will be a bit like that, but they won't be as structured. So you might meet with some people who are very interested in your field. They know your job market paper. They might jump in a very intense way straight into asking you questions about, you know, concavity assumptions you made on some particular functional form, or something specific about how you did your calibration. Whereas others who might not be in your field but were still interested will ask you sort of broader, big picture questions about the contribution, about the field, about where it's going. And then you'll have other people who maybe are more on the teaching side of the department, who really do want to get a sense of what you would be able to teach, were you to join. And some often, you know, are just sort of, they realize, and they've been through it not that long ago, that doing 6, 7, 8, 9 of these in a given day can be very intense. And so they may just say, look, I know you've had an intense time. Do you want to come for a walk with me? Obviously, we won't be able to walk over Zoom, but, you know, do you want to just ask me some questions? Do you want to ask me what it's really like here? I'll try and be honest about what I think the trade-offs were when I took the job. So it's a real mix. But again, if you remember what I said at the very start, that they're trying to decide whether you'd be a good colleague, and research, at least in research-focused institutions, play a big role in that. How you might contribute on policy might play a big role in a policy institution, or how you enjoy teaching or how you teach might be a big part of the job in another institution. What I want to really stress, as I mentioned before, is the biggest challenge I always think is not convincing your own field. If you've done the interviews, they've gone through the shortlisting, your field have basically backed you and brought you in. The challenge now is to convince other fields, because they'll have their own candidates that they're trying to push, and you're trying to make them convinced that, you know, if I don't get my first choice theorist, then I think that macro person is the best other choice. And what that means is you have to, you know, as Marina was saying, you know, you have to, when you meet with them, when you're presenting your research, be aware that you want to bring them along. You want to make them aware of your contributions. But equally, when you sit in their office and you're chatting to them, you know, you show interest in their work, see what the parallels are or what the interesting aspects are. And, you know, really, it's tiring, as Martin said, it's very tiring to concentrate that hard. But I think it really does make a difference at, you know, convincing people across fields that you would be a great colleague to have. So I will stop there and hand over back to Tim.
Yeah, and let me just linking Marina and Michael's presentation. I think one of the key things to make sure is that you communicate your ideas, both in your short interview and more generally, in a way that makes them seem exciting to economists in general, not just of interest to people who just happen to know in detail the area you're working on. So our last presentation will be from Caitlin Brown, who I think was also on the job market last year, and she's going to talk about choosing between offers. So Caitlin, over to you.
Hi, thanks for having me. So I just wanted to start by reiterating a couple of things that people have said before me, which are relevant when you start thinking about, well, if you're in the fortunate place where you have more than one offer, what kind of helps you make that decision? And the first thing is that it's so true that departments are hiring a colleague and not a paper. So it goes the same way. You want to go to a department where you have great colleagues, not necessarily a department that has great papers, because you're going to be seeing these people regularly. You're going to be working with them. You're going to be going to meetings with them. It's super important that you enjoy these people that you're around. And so essentially you want to use your flyouts to kind of information gather, because that's the only time you're going to be kind of interacting with all these people. I know now it's a bit different because you don't actually physically, you're probably not going to physically go to the universities, which is also challenging for reasons that I'll say in a moment. So essentially you want to use the flyout or the flyout to gather information as to whether or not you think that these colleagues, these people that you're meeting, oops, excuse me, these people that you're talking to are going to be good colleagues and a place where you think you're going to thrive professionally and personally. So essentially you want to make sure that people are nice and interesting and you think you could hang out with them for lunch or essentially just enjoy your time with them. And then secondly, this is going to be your home. So this is the part where it's difficult if you're kind of not physically at the place, because you don't know what the campus looks like. You don't know what the housing area surrounding the university looks like. You don't have a vibe for the city or the town that you're in. So you're going to want to do quite a lot of research, and if possible, try and visit the place, because you're going to be living here for the next X years. And so your spouse is going to want to enjoy this place. If you have kids, they're going to want to enjoy this place. So essentially, you're going to want to be thinking during the flyouts, well, is this a good place for me and my life? And generally after the flyouts, you should have a pretty good idea about a general ranking. So if you did get offers, you know that, okay, this place I felt really good about, like these people were great, I'd love to work with them, this would be fantastic. For the most part, the conditions of the offers are relatively homogeneous. And you can make them quite similar. So you can use, if you got a higher salary at one place, but you liked another place, you can, of course, negotiate for a higher salary, or a lower teaching load, more research funds. It's all generally quite negotiable, depending on your situation. So don't choose a place based on the salary, based on like their RepEc ranking. Choose a place that you think you can live in and that you would be happy in, because hopefully you're not going to be spending all of your life in an office. Hopefully you can kind of take a bit of time to enjoy yourself, and you're going to want to be in a place where you can do that. So to me, that was the most important thing, is finding a place where you had a good work, you could imagine yourself having a good work-life balance and you could thrive there. Yeah, so that was my main point for, it's European job market, so everybody's from a different place, but so I'm Australian, and so if you are from a country that's kind of far away, that's another thing you need to be thinking about. So typically visas aren't, I won't say, but I wouldn't make that your primary concern, picking a place where you think you're most likely to get a visa. I would pick a place where you think that you can travel home easily if you need to, if that's relevant to you, that you can travel to go visit your co-authors, your friends, just a place that's kind of, good for the life balance. And I'll wrap up there. I think that was my two main points.
Excellent. Well, thank you. So one thing that all of our panelists have demonstrated, which is an incredibly important talent for the job market, is being brief and staying to time and being very direct in the points that you want to make. There's nothing worse than, particularly in the short interview, having somebody sitting in front of you wondering when you're going to interrupt them to ask them on to wrap up when they answer any question, particularly when they're trying to describe their job market paper in the most excruciating detail. People can always ask for more if they want it, and the advantage is that you can ask for more now because all of our panelists have left plenty of time for discussion. Now, I have been forwarded a number of questions already. I'm going to put some of those to the panelists. I'm going to try and simultaneously keep an eye on the questions that are coming in on my email as we speak. So there's some questions that I'm going to ask perhaps Marina and Michael between them to tackle this on what's distinctive about the UK job market and what the UK institutions are looking for. Is that exactly what everyone else is looking for? Is the UK distinctive or not? So I don't know, you can both come back on that, but would one of you like to comment on that?
Do you want me to chip in first?
Yeah, please, and then Michael can come back.
Yeah, so I think one of the things about the UK, of course, it has its own cycle of research evaluation, which is typical of the UK and affects massively everything to do with research. So UK institutions are evaluated about every 7 years. I say every 7 years roughly because of course different things happen like COVID, which changed deadlines slightly, but it has a research assessment exercise or framework. It's called different ways, but it does happen at regular intervals. This has a number of implications in terms of also the kind of leeway departments have in terms of hiring people who may need a bit more time to mature, but have perhaps really interesting different ideas from people who instead are, you know, very much into the market already and that have that research which looks like it's very topical and it's going to get published straight away. Again, that's, I'm afraid, nothing to do with you personally, but it is important to know that the UK is, you know, right now, for example, there isn't this pressure so much. I mean, we can afford to hire people we genuinely like and we are really interested in seeing developing much more than we would have been a couple of years ago. And this is the kind of information you need to keep at the back of your mind in terms of how you want to present yourself as well. In general, also having some idea of how often institutions get evaluated in the country you're applying in, because these research exercises, these research evaluation exercises are quite similar across countries. You know, there are some in Spain, there are some in Italy, there are some in France, but they have slightly different implications. And in the UK, they have very strong funding implications for institutions. So it actually matters a lot to hear that your paper has got potential for a certain level of journal or another level of journal can mean the difference between £3,000 or £10,000 for a department in terms of the amount of research funding they might get back, or that at least used to be the case. So that is something that you may want to keep in mind, certainly, the research element. And also the fact that, on the other hand, with the exclusion of top institutions, UK institutions are actually very, very teaching income focused these days. So the top institutions are able to capture a lot of the grants. That's not so much the case for the non-top institutions. So they're going to be terribly concerned about your commitment to teaching and your quality of teaching and experience and willingness to teach, because that's where the grant comes from.
Michael.
Yeah, I'll add just a few things. I think one of the issues that I actually always find very desirable about the UK, but actually it extends, I think, across Europe, is actually how relatively small it is as a geographic area. Now, of course, at the moment, you know, getting from place to place is not easy. If you're asked to stay for 2 weeks in isolation every time you cross a border, that's of course the geographic, relatively small geographic area doesn't really help. But in general, I mean, there are lots of great departments and lots of great people across Europe, and it is quite small. I mean, I'm always struck when I've visited the US and I spent time there, sort of as a visiting assistant professor in Stanford. I was struck by how far away the West Coast is from the East Coast, and I've never felt that far away from colleagues even on the continent. So there's something very nice about a small geographic area. And if you take it just to the UK, you know, you can get from London to Glasgow or Edinburgh in a couple of hours by train. So I think it's a good community. I've always found it to be quite a supportive community. In general, I think accepting what Marina says, and I may be talking from one of the people who is benefiting from lots of research grants at the moment, but teaching loads, I think, are in general relatively low here compared to other places, especially when you compare peer to peer. So it's always a sort of discussion that we have, but you know, Oxford is very short terms, but even when I was at Warwick, say, we had 10-week terms, and you would do your teaching in those 10-week terms. You could often concentrate it in, you know, a heavy teaching term, and then you have a big bunch of time for research. Whereas in the US, a more standard load would be 2 or 3 courses, where a course is a 15-week term. And so again, I think that's something that is quite nice. But otherwise, you know, the last thing I want to emphasize what Martin said. You might be struck that certainly my experience everywhere I've ever been doing this, how much it is important to signal willingness to come. That is also actually a part that enters our decision making. You know, if we have someone who signals that they really want to be in the UK, then their sort of attractiveness to us as a candidate really does go up, because you know, we could all chase the top macroeconomist from MIT or from Stanford or Harvard, whatever. But if we know they're never going to come to the UK, then that's sort of a wasted effort from us. And there's a lot of effort. Faculty put in a lot of effort into recruitment. Lots of all these meetings, all these seminars that we attend is because we really care about getting good colleagues in. But if you signal that you really want to come, it can't hurt your application. So I would add that. And the UK maybe in its current situation will require that even more with Brexit and other things. So.
Thank you. If Kevin Lee is there behind, I can only see a blank screen, but I assume he's there. I have a question that perhaps is best answered by Kevin. And there's been a discussion about how the electronic job market is going to work and whether people are going to be asked to make videos to upload ahead of the short interview, perhaps as an alternative to the short interview. Kevin, can you enlighten us on what the modalities might be on that, and perhaps anything else about how the new regime might work?
Well, also there's been a lot of conversations about whether a video is a good idea or a bad idea, and so I think the way that the thought was that if it might advantage those institutions that have got really great facilities and could make very professional videos, and disadvantage less well-resourced institutions. I think that argument was sort of accepted as a genuine one. I think the advantage of having a video, because doing things online is not as good as meeting people. I mean, you can never get to know people as well. So the advantage of a video was you get to see people a little bit more about them. The disadvantage of the video is that it might have that resource thing. I think the punchline of all of this was that no decisions will ever, I think, be made on the basis of a video. The job market paper is going to be much more important, and certainly nobody should spend loads of time trying to produce a very polished video. I don't think any institution is going to be persuaded by the polish of a video. It's always going to be the content. So I'm avoiding the direct question about whether there'll be an insistence on not having videos. I think even at this stage, there's ambiguity on that. But I don't think anybody will be disadvantaged if there are no videos. I think that's the main point of that.
Thanks, Kevin. So I'm going to come back to Caitlin and Martin again now. Two questions. One is sort of a timing going on the job market. I mean, one aspect of that, for example, is people who are in a part of a couple who might be looking for a job. Do you wait and go on the market together? You don't just, right, I'm not asking you to give counseling advice on relationships here, but can you say anything about, is it better in your experience for people to wait and go on the market, go early? And also a question around networking. I mean, you must be experiencing the fact that, you know, you've landed in your new jobs at a time when networking is sort of very different from what it was a year ago. Do you see alternative ways, particularly among younger economists, of how they build networks? Any advice on how you get to meet people who might be working on similar things to you, to get input, not your immediate colleagues, but perhaps more generally? So I don't know who out of Martin and Caitlin might want to come in on that.
I feel completely unqualified to answer the couple question. Martin, I don't know if you want to.
I was also on the market single, so I can't answer that. I think in terms of waiting, I think for a while there was this mentality that waiting doesn't have costs, right? To go a year later if it improves your paper. I think if you look at the profiles from people going on the market these days, if people have done longer PhDs, they tend to have really good R&Rs of publications, right? So I think whenever you wait, there is the cost that expectations do go up a bit. And also just the relevance of your research might shift, right? If you have a great paper now, then the contribution of that a year later might have diminished. And I think you're usually evaluated based on the contribution of your paper whilst you're on the market.
Do either of you have any advice on networking and how you might find people working on similar things yourself, given the absence of a lot of the sort of conferences that people used to get to network before they went on the market?
Oh yeah, that's really tough. So I had a bit of a, so I'll speak first. I had a bit of a different situation because I already was in an assistant professor role. And so I felt like I had 2 years to meet a lot of people. And so when I went on the market last year, I already knew a bunch of people in institutions. And so it was kind of cool because instead of getting my advisors to email someone, I would email them. And that essentially was just built up either through my PhD or going to conferences and talking to people, which again is so much harder now because it's not like you can just randomly bump into someone and start talking to them and realize you have like a bunch of things in common. And it's also kind of awkward to go to an online seminar and then chat to the speaker afterwards, especially if there's a lot of people who also want to talk to the speaker. So I think you really have to be kind of very self-motivated and not shy and reach out to people, even if you do think it's super awkward. So do try and attend like a lot of these online webinars and seminars. Email people directly so you can say, hey, we have a lot in common in terms of our research. Do you have any time, like if do you have like open office hours, or do you have some time where we can chat about research? And that's about what I have.
I think the only thing that I'd like to add, my connection dropped out for a second, but the only thing that I wanted to add to Caitlin is that something changes when you're on the market. So if you're a first or a second year PhD student and you email people, occasionally people might not be as responsive. But if you say, I'm on the market this year, people tend to give more serious feedback. So, because they know how important it is.
Right, thanks. You'll see me furiously writing, by the way, when you're speaking. That's because I'm trying to cover as many of the questions that I'm getting, and I'm having to write down what I'm seeing. There are a whole bunch of questions which I'm going to answer myself around the job market paper. The job market paper does not have to be published. You don't have to have publications to go on the market. And there are questions around, should it be part of your dissertation? Well, almost always it is. Very occasionally, people will have a large range of choices, particularly people who are going on the market who, like Caitlin, were already an assistant professor. I'm not sure whether you used your dissertation or a subsequent paper. There's obviously variability according to when you're going on the market, but typically the job market paper will be from your dissertation and will not be published. I think a slightly more difficult question to answer that is often asked, my students ask me this, and I've heard the question often, is around single authorship versus co-authorship. I think everyone would say in an ideal world, it would be a single authored paper, but you can do very well on the job market with a co-authored paper. There are many examples of people who have, but you obviously from the side of the institution that's considering you for a job, there's a more difficult, for want of a better term, signal extraction problem when you're facing a co-authored paper. I think it's probably more likely problematic when the co-author is a senior person than when the co-author is a junior person, because that makes that problem even harder. But clearly, by the point you get into your webinar at an institution, your capacity to answer questions will in a way say a lot about how you're thinking about the research. And as has been said more than once, it's about hiring you as a person, not hiring a paper. So the issue is around you being able to establish just how this is part of a research agenda that reflects what you're about as an economist. So so there are a number of questions. I think I've covered most of them that came in on the job market. I'm going to turn again. I'm going to try and mix a few different kinds of questions that I'm seeing and come to Marina on the sort of cycle of assessment. Kind of what information is used at what stage of the job market process. In particular, what state does the job market paper have to be in at the very earliest stage? Can it be very unfinished at that stage or not? and also what information should be submitted with an application? What's most useful? Is it just the job market paper, because after all that's what would be presented in a seminar, or is there lots of other information that's particularly useful? So I'll ask Marina, and I think I'll ask Michael that after Marina, so you can think of your answers as well, Michael.
So one thing, of course, is some of this is dictated by HR. So there will be information that you have to submit regardless of whether you were intending to. But there is certainly always a letter that goes with your application, and people tend to underestimate that and actually send very standard letters, to the extent that this is a little bit going to sound like the IMF stories where, you know, people give advice and they've forgotten to change the name of the country. We get that with the name of the institution people are applying to sometimes. Now that application letter is actually the chance to show that, again, you know where you're applying, and it is important to devote a little bit of time to it. Of course, as Tim said, job market paper tends to be the first thing we look at, but it's not the only thing we look at. And actually, very often, we make an explicit effort to, first of all, look at how people present themselves and whether they're serious about us, especially if you think that we may be putting out an advert for one job and, you know, we maybe get 300 applicants or even more sometimes. So we do need to obviously have a process by which, which is, of course, a very formal process by which to sift through all these things. But we don't just look at job market papers, definitely. Echoing what's been said before, of course, we're interested in job market papers that are at any stage pretty much. And also we're interested sometimes in seeing, for people who perhaps have a job market paper, but you know, sometimes you could be in that situation where you have two papers that are looking quite promising, and maybe one is more topical for right now in economics, but it's not the one you've done the most of your work on, for example. This kind of happens towards the end of a PhD. And sometimes you just kind of find it difficult to choose. So it's quite useful to give an overview of what your research agenda is like, and to be very honest and to say, you know, I'm sending this because it's the most polished, but it's actually not the one that right now I think is the most interesting. So I also have this. And there's no harm submitting more material. Again, the worst that can happen is people don't look at it. But you know, it will show that you actually have a variety of things you're thinking about. I would say, yes, that self-presentation letter is super important. And the more you can say about the kinds of things that Michael said before we're looking for when we're interviewing, your ability to relate to people and communicate and work across, you know, lots of people during their PhDs have already had very interesting experiences of working in teams of different people, with even coming from not just different parts of the discipline, but different disciplines too. I would highlight that, and I would highlight anything that sort of comes across that is non-standard, because as I said, anything that can make you stand out will be really important.
Michael, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I just add a few little things. So I guess if you think about a standard application, if you think you submit a letter, you submit a CV, a job market paper, and then any of the other things, maybe teaching evaluations are asked for, maybe other papers you've got that you want to submit, because as Marina says, you know, you want to signal as well that you have these complete papers. The other thing, of course, that comes in are letters from your advisors. Okay, so if I break down the process into, you've applied, how do you get from being in the application pool into the group selected for the interviews? Well, Martin already said it. There's a bunch of stuff you don't know that's going on in the background, be it departmental needs or group needs or politics, all sorts of things that could determine exactly which fields they're really looking at. But in general, the probability that you get from the sort of pool into the set selected for interview is going to depend a lot on the advisors' letters, the job market paper, and the CV. So that's the sort of bit where we focus. So that introduces one aspect of the job market, which, well, it was certainly the case when I was at LSE. I'm not sure if they still do it. It's very typical that you at some point in this process, usually before now, but if not done yet, you should do it now, is sit down with your advisor and have a very realistic and honest conversation about where you will apply, and if you apply there, how strongly they can write a letter. So if I turned around and said, I'm definitely applying to MIT because that's where I think I should end up, and my advisor disagrees, my advisor may decide they're not going to write as strong a letter And that will hurt me everywhere I apply because they will write one letter. Whereas if we agree that I can apply certain places and that's back me strongly, then they're also more likely to get on the email and email people they know at the institution. And all of that stuff does actually play some role. The other aspect of that first step that I wanted to mention was, again, something Martin mentioned about networking. There was a candidate, I won't mention who they were here, but someone who, when I was working as an academic, I presented a paper many times at many top places. And I turned up to give a paper and I met with one of the PhD students and they made comments that I had not heard before about the paper, very astute comments, and they really stood out. And then I knew they were on the market that year. So when I saw they applied, I went into this pile and picked them out because I said, I know from that one interaction that now everything else from there on in, they have to perform at the interview, they have to perform at the presentation. You know, it's not, you don't get the job that way, but you get your name into the smaller pile. Beyond that, at the second stage, it's how you perform at the interview, as well as the CV, the job market paper, and everything else. And then for most places, certainly for research-focused places, things like teaching evaluations come in when you get to the final stage, when you've done a job market visit, when we're really trying to decide, and we might be really at the margin of there's candidates that are sort of looking pretty equal, but you know, Marina has applied and she's got really great teaching evaluations, and Michael, who looks very similar on research, but he's not very good at teaching, it's very clear it's going to swing it towards Marina. So I think there is that focus, certainly in my experience, coming from the from sort of research focused places.
Thank you. So here's a question that I'm definitely unsuited to answering, and that's a question about online presence and online platforms, which I'm tempted to say is something for our younger colleagues, although Marina in the chat has rightly pointed out that there's some hashtag called Econ Twitter, which I was unaware of, showing what a dinosaur I am, which is a good place to place your work. But I don't know whether Martin or Caitlin want to comment on how to be on that frontier that I know nothing about.
Okay, well, I can go first. So I'm on Twitter. If you want to follow me, no. So yeah, it's again going back to this whole networking thing. Like, I think a lot of economists are very introverted and not very good at kind of like going up to people and talking to them. And it's the same in online formats, right? So on Twitter, you know, you kind of have to be a bit active on there if you want to get to know people. And most people are super nice on Twitter because it's a public forum, right? So it's not like, you know, econ job market rumors where there's just people sitting behind their screens, like, you know, making nasty comments. Econ Twitter is actually super nice. And you have a lot of different people from different places, like policy, government, nonprofits, private sector. So kind of being active on Twitter and just, you know, writing a comment every now and then, liking a post, retweeting someone. You know, you can kind of get to know quite a few people through Twitter. In terms of any other kind of online formats, I mean, obviously you have your web page. And so if you put your website on like your email signature, that at least kind of encourages people a little bit more to click on your website and see what you're doing. Emailing people is also okay, but you know, you don't want to be too aggressive about that. Usually if you email people with like a particular question that you have that's relevant, it'll, you know, increase the chances that that person will actually write back to you. So I'll let Martin.
Thank you, Caitlin. Martin, anything to add on?
I'm also on Twitter, but I'm not convinced that it has a massive effect on your job market. I think the people that have been in search committees are better in a better position to answer this. But my impression is that when you look through applications, you start with the file, and you don't Google to go and see what someone's Twitter persona is. I do think the website is really important, right? So this year, when the first universities have started to put their list of job market candidates online, there's occasionally people that I can't find from Googling. That is, of course, annoying, right? Because when you see these names, you see they're in macro, they've got an interesting job market paper title. You want to see their profile, right? You want to see what else they've worked on. So I think that's really important. I'm not sure Twitter is that important for the job market itself.
I'm going to say it a bit. if I may chip in, Tim, sorry,
Sure,
quickly.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it depends on who's on that hiring committee. So our hiring committee has got a lot of people very active on Twitter. We did look everyone up before the interviews because it's the collegiality aspect. And we saw in what way they were interacting with other people. I'm not saying at the margin it made maybe any difference, but it was extra information. So it depends on, I guess, you know, how active people are in the hiring committee you're on. But don't underestimate it as a source of information anyway, and to check out the competition as well, because particularly from the United States, I think job market candidates are very active using it. And they also tend to get very good feedback and advice on working papers before they've actually become papers. That's something I've definitely noticed. So even just for, not necessarily for the job market, but for keeping up with research, it might actually be worthwhile. It's something I would certainly consider. Thank you.
Thanks. And just one thing to add to that, and obviously institutions vary, but so I can only speak for my own, but junior people are very actively involved in junior hiring. Indeed, I would say that their voice is at least as influential as that of more senior people. So remember that you're communicating very often to them, not just to the most senior people in a department. I've got one actually that maybe Kevin could comment on, which is, are we going to have, I know in the EA job market, it had become common for people to be able to send a signal about institutions or places they're particularly keen to go. Are we planning to build something like that into the market here? Any thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, Tim, I keep answering by saying I don't know. So I've not heard people talk about that facility over the last weeks. So it's not something that I think is happening, but I have to admit that I might be wrong on that, but I don't think so.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Okay, so sorry, did you have something else to say there, Ken?
No, just to apologize for my lack of knowledge.
No. I mean, I think this is an important issue, namely that there's a lot of thinking still going on, and you will get updated thinking, and we will do our best to broadcast what the latest thinking is on this. But you know, this is an evolving situation with the market moving online, and there will be many things to be learned still over the coming weeks. Here's a tricky question, and I don't know if anyone wants to take it, and that's, do you think multidisciplinarity is valued among econ job market candidates? Does anyone want to venture a view on that, or are we all really only care about people who are doing very straightforward econ? I see your hand raised. Yeah, so I'll have a go. I'll do it largely as someone who sort of crosses some boundaries of fields occasionally. I think there are certainly some aspects of multidisciplinarity that play in. The first really insular one that works very well is when you cross fields within economics. I know that's not what the question is getting at, but again, going back to my first point of, you're trying to essentially come away from your job market visit having as many people in the department think you were great and would be a great hire. And you know, if you do economic history, applied micro, and your work also touches on some aspects of kind of micro level, macro stuff like consumption and retirement savings decisions, you know, there's just more people in the department who are likely to be sort of buzzing after you leave and go, oh, that person was fantastic, and that helps. So I think the question was more getting at, what if you do, you know, economic history and politics, and how does that help or hinder you? I think it varies a lot by department. So for example, in Oxford now, we have a number of people who, like myself, do some field, plus using a lot of tools from machine learning or from data science. And so there's a bit of a group of us in separate fields, but who have that secondary outside of our discipline link. And so I think it does help there. I think it helps us to try and convince people who do that coming would be a stimulating environment, but also it helps if you come into that environment that there'd be many of us who go, well, I know the person doesn't do macro, but I like what they're doing with the machine learning stuff, so I'm actually really backing them. If you join a department and there was nobody bringing that extra dimension, it would then really depend on whether the department had decided they want that. Or I could see a situation where you kind of fall through the cracks of everyone acknowledging it's interesting and exciting, but nobody really backing you. And I think that's the bottom line. You need a group of people in the department backing you to really have the sort of strongest chances.
and that becomes difficult if you're sort of, if you're not anyone's first choice, but you're everybody's second choice. I fear that in many cases that person drops out, even if they're sort of the sum of their rankings was sort of the best at going. So I think it can hurt, but in the right department, in a place where you'd fit, I think it could really help. But it also depends on the university. If you're in a university that has lots of other people working in that area, it might be that they work closely together and there'd actually be a joint appointment possible, which would be very desirable for both departments. So a horribly economist answer, which is it depends, but hopefully I've given enough color to let people work out when.
Okay, one final question, because we have to wrap up in a minute. I'm going to put to Marina. Some people come on the market with little or no teaching experience. They can't give you teaching evaluations. Is that a serious drawback on the market if people cannot show any evidence of teaching experience?
So yes, actually it is. And you can, I think, show something, even if you've not done very much, because you're still preparing and the job market is going to happen and you can always volunteer. I mean, we've had people who showed really good teaching avals for having offered 1 or 2 sessions or some support in some course of someone else. So we're not really looking for extended evidence that you've really been heavily involved in teaching. In fact, we might be a bit worried because Reading is also a research intensive institution. So what we really want to see though is that you've engaged with the fact that you're also applying for a position which does involve teaching, and therefore you know, you've at least had a taste, because we would be very worried about someone who joins in and then finds that they hate it, for example, because it is expected on the job. But as I said, it doesn't have to be extensive, massive experience. So think about asking even now to chip in on sessions, to offer some labs, to supporting whichever capacity you have, and just get some teaching avals on that session. And these days, of course, because so many things are online, it's that easier actually to get evaluations back from students, because you do it yourself as you do the session, and maybe get some letters of support. But I would try and get a little bit of teaching evidence on that CV, definitely, yes.
Excellent, thank you very much. Well, we've reached the 1 hour mark, which is what we reserved for this. Thank you to Marina, Michael, Martin, and Caitlin and Kevin for their contributions. I think it would be very useful for the Royal Economic Society for you to tell us how useful you find this event. We've had some really high quality presentations, I think, from people who've, I think, filled in the dots that are often missing for you when you just see the formal structure of the job market. And if you think that future generations of students would benefit from making this an annual event, that's something that would be very useful to know from you. Otherwise, I just thank you all for joining us, to the Royal Economic Society for putting this on, and once again to all of our excellent speakers. Have a good remains of the day, and with that, we'll leave you.